12 feet down, in the grey cold of a Connecticut winter, a forest is growing. It has no roots in any soil. It drinks no fresh water. And by spring, a single acre of it will weigh more than a car. The man who planted it never meant to be a farmer. He meant to catch fish as many and as fast as the sea would give up. His name is Bren Smith. And to understand what he built, you have to start with what he helped destroy. Smith grew up in Petty Harbor, Newfoundland, and went to sea at 14. By his 20s, he was trawling cod on the Grand Banks, dragging nets so heavy they scraped the ocean floor bare. Then, in 1992, the cod were simply gone. Canada closed the fishery overnight. Around 30,000 people lost their work in a single day, the largest layoff in the country's history. Smith had spent years helping to empty the ocean. Now the ocean had nothing left to give. So he went looking for a way to put something back. He landed on Long Island Sound, off the town of Brantford, and became an oysterman, a quieter, gentler kind of harvest. For a while it worked. Then in 2011, Hurricane Irene, and a year later, Hurricane Sandy. 2 storms back-to-back buried his oyster beds under feet of mud and silt. He lost most of his crop twice bankrupt now, once from a fishery that collapsed, and once from a sea that had turned violent. And here he asked the question this whole story turns on. What if the problem wasn't the sea but the shape of the farm? Every farm he'd ever known was flat. A field, a seabed, a single fragile layer, exposed to every storm. What if you farmed the ocean vertically instead, top to bottom, in the water column itself? The design he settled on is almost absurdly simple. A few anchors, horizontal ropes floating just beneath the surface, held up by buoys, and from them everything else hangs down. From the top ropes, sugar kelp grows downward in long amber ribbons, some fronds stretching 9-10 feet by harvest. Below and between them hang the shellfish, mussels in socked nets, and on the seabed, cages of oysters, clams, and scallops. One column of water, many crops, stacked. Now, the extraordinary part. This farm needs no fresh water, no fertilizer, no feed, and no land. The kelp and shellfish live on what's already in the water sunlight, and the nutrients the sea carries anyway. You don't feed this farm. You just give it something to hold on to. From a single acre, Smith's model can produce up to roughly 10 tons of kelp and 250,000 shellfish every single year. And because most of it lives below the surface, the storms that once destroyed his oyster beds now pass largely overhead. The farm bends with the water instead of breaking against it. But here is where it stops being merely clever and starts being restorative. This farm doesn't just take less, it gives back. Farm runoff and sewage pour nitrogen into coastal waters, feeding algae blooms that choke the life out of them. Kelp and shellfish do the opposite. They pull that nitrogen back out. They filter it. Kelp also absorbs carbon and dissolved CO2 as it grows, easing the acidification that's dissolving shellfish elsewhere. A farm that leaves the water around it cleaner than it found it. Within a season, the ropes become a reef. Fish shelter in the kelp. Crabs work the cages. A patch of empty water turns into a place that's crowded with life. Smith called it a vertical ocean farm restorative, or 3D ocean farming. His own sits off the Thimble Islands, but he was never interested in owning the idea, because a single farm off Connecticut changes nothing. And this next decision is the one that separates a good story from a movement. Through a non-profit called Green Wave, Smith gave the blueprint away. The anchors, the ropes, the species, the spacing, all of it, open source. Free for anyone on Earth to copy. And Green Wave doesn't just publish plans. It trains new farmers, many of them former fishermen, like Smith himself, to start their own farms on as little as 20 acres and a modest boat. In 2015, the model won the Buckminster Fuller Challenge, an award for the design judged most likely to solve humanity's biggest problems. And the ambition was never a farm. It was a fleet. Green Wave's goal is to seed thousands of these farms, run by tens of thousands of people, strung along the world's coastlines. The math behind that is startling. Some researchers estimate that farming seaweed across even a small fraction of the world's oceans could soak up meaningful amounts of carbon and feed millions without a single drop of fresh water. It is not a silver bullet. The markets for kelp are still young, the permits are slow, and no single crop saves a planet. Smith is the first person to say so. But he has done the rarest thing in the whole fight for the ocean. He took a way of making a living from the sea, and made it heal the sea at the very same time. A twice-bankrupt trawlerman turned a storm-wrecked patch of Long Island Sound into a blueprint anyone can build. If you want to see exactly how it works, the design, the species, the numbers, and how a new farmer actually begins, the full breakdown is in the link below.